this week's scoop, I keep you updated with some of the happenings and news across our platforms over this past very short week. Now, the temptation might be to make soccer puns like I did in my newsletters last week, but I'm going to avoid that and I'm going to focus on the real game. And I think the big news this week is the peace agreement or peace treaty or ceasefire that has been put in place between the US and Iran very recently. And to copy a question from Leon's episode of Living Markets with Liberty this week, what is the definition of a ceasefire? And when the president of the US uses phrases like, I'm going to bomb the bleep out of them, that doesn't sound like peace to me, but let's hope in this instance that this is an ongoing and lasting treaty and agreement and arrangement between these two countries. So while we're celebrating peace there, I'm more interested in when we can celebrate a little bit of relief at the petrol pumps. And given the implication and the impact of the US-Iran war on both petrol and then streaming into CPI figures and the inflation numbers posted this week as well, I'm looking forward to some relief at the petrol pumps and hoping that that will translate into cheaper groceries for me and my family. The increase in interest rates wasn't mimicked by the US, however. We saw the Fed this week keeping their rates the same. And it points to a piece of content on EBNet from a number of economists out there talking about the decorrelation or the delinking of various economies. That article was specifically with regards to Europe versus the US, or not versus the US, but in comparison to the US. And so we are talking about a macro perspective that I don't think we've ever seen before. And it links back to the conversation between Leon, John Taylor, and Abhikar Samaru from Liberty around how investors should be positioning themselves, and I want to say in terms of their stock selection and strategy, but also in terms of their psychology and the psychological warfare that may be going on in their own minds. But as we experience this kind of volatility, what is your safest weapon as an investor? It's a great episode, and not only is it a great episode for you to listen to, but probably a good episode to share with any of your clients or any of your fund members, because it gives a great context on what is happening in investment markets at the moment and certainly explains it in a way that will bring it to life and will make sense to investors out there. So that's Living Markets with Liberty. The other action on EBNet Stream this week was the latest episode of Inside Private Markets, and that's brought to us by Old Mutual Alternative Investments. And in this episode, which is episode 10 of 12, we use the opportunity to bring real life case studies and examples to the table. Now, private markets and private investing and infrastructure investing is not a new conversation. It gathered momentum at the BATSETA conference this year, which was a couple of weeks ago, where the finance minister himself invited pension funds and institutional investors to join him in the sandpit of infrastructure. But what is coming to the fore now is these case studies and real life examples of projects that have been launched, invested in, and shown real returns for investors, and not only returns on the scoreboard in terms of financial returns, but also for the communities, the individuals and the families that those projects are uplifting. So we may have had a short week, but we certainly haven't had a short week of content, because also just as early as this morning, I published this week's episode of Exec Meet and Greets. That's with Yashoda Naidu from Presium Capital Partners. He is the CEO there, and what a fantastic conversation around again, talking about investments, but a philosophical perspective on our roles as the stewards and the custodians of other people's money. I'm sure Yashodan should have rather been a philosophist or a philosopher. He's landed in impact investing. I don't think that's an accident, and certainly an excellent conversation to share with your youngsters who might be going to university or considering various careers as they try and navigate the world of being a millennial. Now, I did promise in my one newsletter this week that I would share with you why my daughter thinks it's so difficult to be a millennial. I'll share one thing with you, and it links back to the interest rates. My daughter, who is studying economics at the moment, mentioned to me that it's difficult for millennials to be able to afford their own homes and move away from their parents, which is something that they are desperate to do. Now, that could just be my kids, because their mother can be a bit of a battle axe, I'm not going to lie. But my daughter did share with me that she believes that it's very difficult for the kids of today to move out of home and to launch their own independence. Now, secretly inside of myself, I'm saying to my kids, live with your mom as long as you can. But there is a part of me that wants them out of the house. Now, with the increase in interest rates, that makes debt more difficult for these millennials who are navigating, as I've mentioned, this AI environment.
Hi, pals! Greetings from Sammy. EBNet is proud to bring you top quality content from experts across the financial services industry in South Africa and internationally for free. Your support helps us in doing this. All we ask is that you subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below. Share this video with others you think will benefit from it. And give us a thumbs up if you are enjoying the content. That way you help us help you. Thank you from the team at EBNet. For more great content, please visit www.ebnet.co.za. Ciao, ciao, and bye-bye.
Why am I telling you all of this? Well, this week was Youth Day, and the month of June has always been celebrated as Youth Month. So across a number of our platforms, or all of our platforms, I've actually been posting a couple of really good pieces on the financial planning habits that youngsters can put in place when it comes to dealing with money. It was as recently as yesterday, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a managing director of a very large manufacturing business or a construction business, and said to him at the age of 54, what would he change, or what would he go back and tell his 24-year-old self, 30 years ago about life and about things in general. And his comment to me was, I would tell myself how to work with money. And I was reminded in that moment of how universal money is, and how dangerous it is that to assume that somebody who has reached the pinnacle of their career is somebody who understands how money works. They may be a great heart surgeon, or a great brain surgeon, or a great engineer, or a great whatever, editor, but that doesn't mean that they know necessarily how to deal with their own money. And going back to those articles on EBNet, that's on www.ebnet.co.za, there are some great lessons there, and tidbits and hints and habits that investors and savers out there can implement. And that's not to say that if you're not a millennial, you can't do it. Rather start now than never. It's never too early and never too late, right? Compound interest works for all of us. So go and check that out. Share some of those articles with your kids. I know I have, to say to them, guys, if you're saving 100 Rand, 200 Rand, 500 Rand a month in your tax-free savings account, or you're buying unit trusts or buying equities, start learning those habits and start learning how money works. And before you know it, you'll be trading gold ETFs like this editor. Not really. That's a poke at Leon, who made a joke in Living Markets with Liberty. So again, go check that out. What else happened this week? We had a great webinar with Fairheads Benefit Services, discussing the bad rep that I feel beneficiary funds have had recently, and almost an overcorrection. So in the past, all miners' money went into beneficiary funds, or we used to call them trust funds. Then somebody moaned, and the pension funds adjudicator was interpreted as saying all miners' monies must get paid as lump sums to guardians. And perhaps that was an overcorrection. And that is one of the conversations or questions that we did explore in this webinar. The recording is on our website. Again, you can go to www.ebnet.co.za, catch the recording, understand how these beneficiary funds work, how do the trustees manage these, how approachable are they to preserve benefits for miners. And in this two-pot world where we as an industry or the employee benefits or retirement industry has agreed that retirement funds are there to fill a dual purpose. One is to meet emergency needs and the other is to save for the long term. My question really to David Herford and Tasha Jatu, who was also in attendance, was why are we not mimicking that with our beneficiary funds and with the benefits we pay to minor beneficiaries? A great conversation. Go check it out. Tasha is also an independent trustee, which lent a very interesting perspective to the discussion on beneficiary funds. But as I've been preparing for next week's webinar on independent trustees and really shining a spotlight on that role, I've started thinking more and more about our industry, the evolution into where we are now, and that is off the top of my head, consolidation into these big commercial umbrella funds, really just a handful of them. This consolidation, this huge amount of compliance, this need to have to know so much to make lots of decisions that affect lots of lives, is really placing a burden on trustees. And does this open a conversation where the future looks like only independent trustees? What is the role of those trustees? What is reasonable for them to charge? What do we expect from them? And that might be the decisions that they reach, the support they may need to give commercial sponsors, but then also members, and how do they balance those two stakeholders? And then also what we expect from them in terms of their professionalization, their ongoing fit and proper status, and how are we measuring that? It is a conversation I cannot wait to surface with the FSCA, with Momentum Corporate, and with ICTS Legal Services, brought to you by Momentum Corporate, a very, very important and possibly in some moments awkward conversation about what we are expecting, not only from these professional independent trustees, but from trustees in general. Because as I say, as we consolidate the industry into these commercial umbrellas, who is reffing? Couldn't help but get a soccer pun in there for today. Who is reffing the rules of the game and who is watching for own goals? And so that is a great conversation. Also next week, what's happening is the Sanlam Benchmark survey. Those results drop, I think, next week, Thursday. So I will be at that event and I will bring you some updates and some feedback from that. And always an interesting piece of research that this industry uses. So where will I be seeing you next week? A great industry insights that's coming. It might have something to do with AI. Don't want to spoiler alert. An excellent webinar with the FSCA and drilling down into their expectations and measurements of trustees, be those member elected, employer appointed, or independent. And another episode of Power Plays and Paydays. So go register for that webinar. We'll put the link in the blurb below this. Share this with your friends and family. Go and read up on financial habits that you and your kids can put in place for your families. I feel so strongly about financial literacy and about making it available to every South African, because you don't have to be rich in order to need a financial planner or to follow a financial plan. In fact, it's the small habits that you do consistently that will actually get you to your goal. So until next week.